Okay, I didn't know that she was going to do that. And now I can't talk. Let me dabble. Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about Eve, the mother of all living. We're going to focus on Eve that we read about in Genesis, but we're going to talk about who she was, and we're going to talk about the significance of her being the mother of all living. We're going to talk about lessons about motherhood that we can know about Eve, and we're going to talk about some other lessons about motherhood. That'll be how we end this. The topic of motherhood is particularly personally dear to me because, as Tish said through Cindy, well, I don't know that she said this part, but it was my role as a mother that led me to start looking for God. I was expecting my first child, not mine, Bert, and Bert is my husband, so he was in there too. So we both were expecting our first child, and I was pregnant with her. So sorry. Y'all, I wear hearing aids, and I just answered a call. I did that not long ago, and I had a doctor manipulating my neck at a doctor's office, and I couldn't say anything. But I know how to turn my phone off. Sorry about that. Okay, don't disturb me. But I was a new mother, because you're a mom when your baby's in utero. I was a new mom, living a life that was, I knew, not the best. I wanted the baby to have the best life that they could have. And so my husband and I didn't know where to start. We started visiting different churches. If it had a name and a steeple, we were visiting, because we knew that we were confused. There were so many different buildings, so many different churches, did not know where to start. But because my husband had grown up visiting denominations, I pretty much had no spiritual exposure. I had very little spiritual exposure growing up. But as newlyweds, we visited a particular denomination in the Memphis area when we were living here. But, we didn't really know where to start except to start visiting different churches. And, I believe Providence sent into our lives a couple, and that was BJ and Tish, because I'm getting ready to go back to work. The baby's going to be born. I'm getting ready to go back to work, and I don't really want to, but I'm looking for a babysitter that I cannot like, and I met Tish, and I did like her. So, but you know what BJ did? He made sure he was there when she started babysitting. I went back to work, and he made sure that he was there whenever we came home, and very, very soon, in a non-pressury way, asked if we wanted to study the Bible. And I said no. We're just looking for a church, because I did not know the truth was in the Bible. I had been told, just do what the preacher at wherever you are says if you want to. But he had been raised in a denomination, and he knew something wasn't quite right. It was confusing. So BJ asked if we wanted to study the Bible, and we're thankful that we did say yes. We're thankful he did ask. And that was actually 32 years ago tonight that we were both baptized. So we are so thankful that they asked if we wanted to study the Bible, and that we did study the Bible, because the life that we now have is far different than the trajectory we had, far different. But not just for us, for our 5 children and now the 1 grandchild. We're all living a different life, we now know. So I share that because we're going to talk about Eve, we're going to talk about motherhood, we're going to talk about, and motherhood is what brought us to Christ. I'm so thankful for that. So let's get started with who was Eve? The first man was created on the 6th day of creation, Genesis 2:7. Jehovah God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him." So after forming every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, God did make a woman from man's rib. That was Genesis 2:18 through 22. God blessed them, and he told them in Genesis 1:27-29 to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish, the birds, and every living thing. He gave them every one of the trees there and every seed-bearing herb to provide food for them. Genesis 1:27-29. He put them in the Garden of Eden. He said, keep it, dress it, and keep it. He told them they could eat from all of the trees except the garden, the one tree. And it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or they would surely die. Genesis 2:17. But in Genesis 3, Satan came to the woman in the form of a serpent. He tempted her to eat of that fruit of the forbidden tree. And when the woman saw in Genesis 3:6, saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, what did she do? She disobeyed God and she ate of that forbidden fruit. And that one act is what brought sin into the world for the first time. And this is probably a good time to note that sometimes Eve is given negative credit, for the fall of all mankind. And yes, she is who sin was brought through. She was active participant in bringing sin into this world, opening those floodgates, this pristine, pure world, Romans 5:12. But we also want to be mindful of the account and acknowledge that she influenced the man and he also partook of the fruit. They're each responsible for their own actions. The woman, she did not obey God when she was tempted by the serpent. She lusted after it, she ate it, and she influenced the man. For the man, he did not obey God. He listened to the woman instead, and he ate the fruit also. So he joined in her sin. And while we talk about this, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but they both faced their consequences for disobeying God and bringing sin into the world. So we know that as they are being fruitful and multiplying, the woman was the first mother. We don't know when she began having children, but whether it was before or after the sin in the garden, we do see in Genesis that after that disobedience, Genesis 3:20, the man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. So the name Eve actually, what does it mean to say Eve was the mother of all living? The Greek word actually means life giver. And we know that she had Cain, Abel, Seth, and other sons and daughters. So they do go on to have other children. In Genesis 5:4, we see this. And I was thinking about our own, I don't know if you call your grandmother, if you have a great grandmother, Eve, if we go back 4,000 to 6,000 years, there's a lot of great. She's our great. It could be as many as 140 on up to like 215 greats in front of great grandmother or in front of grandmother. In 1726, in Acts 17:26, that's not far enough, by the way. If we go back to 17:26, that's not far enough to get to Eve. But Paul said in Acts 17:26 that all nations are are made from one man, and Eve is the female human through whom all mankind was made possible. And it does not matter what color our skin is and was. It does not matter what nation we're from. We're all related. We all have that same great grandmother. And Eve was the first mother, and she was the mother of all living. We don't know a whole lot about Eve when it comes to motherhood, but there are some things we can know about motherhood, or we can infer from what we do know about motherhood when it comes to Eve's life. We do know that there's the formation of the family whenever we see Adam and Eve being created. God blessed them, again, being fruitful and multiplying. And Eve's primary purpose in Genesis 2:18, she was to be a helpmeet and a wife to Adam. They were to become one flesh. And Eve was also to be a mother, Genesis 2:24. And that's the same for us today. God created a husband and a wife to be one, and together they raise the children. So we should, one of the things that's really important for us to remember is that we should respect the roles and priorities that God has given each of us as human beings and avoid changing them. Now, when it comes to the woman in a family where the mother and the father are present, we as the wives should allow the husbands to be the head of the home and avoid trying to lead the family ourselves. With today's culture, sometimes that can be a temptation. Maybe you've thought or heard, well, if it's going to get done and get done right, I've got to do it. And you know that can be true in some situations, but one of the best ways we can operate within our roles as wives and mothers is to step back and allow our husbands to have the reins. Of all things, I've noticed in some situations, when we don't do that, that's where the problem is. And we've got to allow them space to be that, the head of our homes and the head of our relations in our families. Stepping back and allowing them to do that, allowing them to have the reins, lets that be easier. Ideally, both the mother and the father can, if we're on conflicting thoughts about an issue, hopefully we can talk and get on the same page. But if for any reason there's a difference in judgment, if there's whose ultimate responsibility is it? It is the husband's responsibility to make the decision. An example might be, let's say you have a teenager, because, I'll go ahead and say this. Whenever we are mothers, we're a mother when the child's in utero, but we're still a mother when they're older. And we're going to talk about some of those things. But let's say you have a teenager, and the teenager wants to go somewhere you want them to go, and the husband says, no, it's not safe, or whatever reason. If we cannot get on the same page, it is his responsibility to make the decision. And we should never decide that we don't agree and let that child go anyway, or usurp his authority within the family. Everything we do in our roles as Christian mothers will strengthen or weaken our marriages and our families. We should also remember that we're setting an example for those children that we have, and for others who see us and how we operate within our roles as mothers. Our actions in motherhood are going to point others toward God, and that includes our children, toward God or away from Him. We also want to remember that as the husband and wife who are one flesh, sometimes it can be tempting to allow the children to take so much of the front seat that we lose focus of who's actually married. And I do say now, I'm so glad that I know my husband, because now our youngest is 20. And he's gone away to college. So whoever you are married to, that's who you're left looking at. And it is really important that you know that person that you're married to. But if in your marriage you are letting the children take the front seat, and if we operate outside of our roles and allow others in the family to operate outside the roles, it causes problems. I'll also say that it's important not to allow the child to raise themselves and force them to make all the decisions for how they live their lives. There's a hierarchy of sorts of the organization of the home, and each member functioning is within the role is important. So the formation of the family. We also see that Eve did not have a physical mother for guidance. As the first mother, Eve did not have a maternal example of how to be a mother and raise the children, but who did she have? She had direct connection and personal access to God for guidance in how to live, and that would have included motherhood. We may or may not have a physical, godly example of motherhood and know how to do that ourselves, but we do have also that connection with God. 2 Timothy 3:16 and Matthew 21:22 help us see that we do have guidance from God through His Word and prayer. God's also given us women, godly, aged women, to instruct and train the young women, Titus 2:3 and 5. And when those women take that role seriously, isn't it a blessing when we can turn to them for guidance and support? If we have been blessed with a godly mother or woman in our lives, we should determine to be, even if we haven't been blessed with a godly example, we should seek to be that example for the many, many, many women around us who don't know what to do and don't know how to be godly or know how to live their lives. Eve was tempted. That's a third thing we can learn. Did you know we can be tempted all through every day? I used to think that being tempted was a sin, but it's not the temptation, it's giving in. But how are we going to be strong? Eve was tempted, and by that she had her mind corrupted. We can be tempted and have our minds corrupted. 2 Corinthians 11:3 says, corrupted from the simplicity and the purity that is toward Christ. So we want to be mindful of how to be toward Christ mentally and in action. The price that we pay is very high when we choose to sin as a mother, because it puts our own souls at risk, but it also, we have eyes on us, whether they're little, and like I was saying, any age. As a mother, we have eyes on us, and we want to be vigilant to live our lives as examples of the way Christ wants us to live them, God wants us to live them. We have consequences. Another point is we have consequences even from many, many generations later. We have consequences of the actions of one, and that's true for us. Our actions now can be influential on someone else for many years. We need to be aware of that. Whether we're being a positive or a negative example for Christ, it can affect even future generations, as Eve did. Eve had influence on Adam. As Adam's helper, Eve had a lot of influence on him. And after being tempted herself, what did she do? She decided to influence Adam to partake of that forbidden fruit. She gave the fruit to him, and he ate. And when we're married, we also have influence with our husbands. Whether we're going to we can influence our husbands for God or for bad. Our goal should be to lovingly influence our husbands for God. And another very important lesson that we can learn from Eve is that each person has their own will. One of the lessons we can learn from her is that even though her children they had the same parents, and they were probably raised with similar upbringing, similar respect, focus to respect God as the Creator. But she had a son. Cain acted against his brother Abel and killed him, Genesis 4:8. Just because the child has the same parents does not mean that they're going to automatically make decisions that please God. Have you ever had, if you are a mother in here, or if you've witnessed motherhood, or maybe siblings even notice this, the children, with my first child was born, the second child, they're both girls, I'm thinking they're kind of alike. No, they're not. And you start seeing it very, very early, whether it's male, female, children are different. They're also different in their wills. They have different wills. And Eve, just like all mothers, she could not control the children's choices. While as individuals with responsibilities of our own, we sometimes make decisions that don't please God, but we should remember when it comes to our children that we make decisions about whether or not to obey God throughout the day as we face all those temptations and as we're being proactive to live for Him. But there comes a time when our children will make those their own decisions about whether to obey God or not. Okay, so those are 5 things that we can learn about Eve as the mother of all living. But let's talk about some other lessons about motherhood. We're going to focus on 3 areas that can help us be sure that we're helping our children get to heaven, but ourselves also. And the first thing is ensure that you're on the path to heaven. We're on the path to heaven. That's important for us. We also want to focus on training our child in the way they're to go, and then we'll focus on when they are older. So the first one, ensure you're on the path to heaven. When somebody is going through a major change in their life, like maybe they've lost someone, maybe they found that they have a terminal illness, or maybe they've moved to another area. Maybe they're a college student and they've gone to an area they don't know anyone. It is important for you. it's important to recognize that they are going through a change, and that might be the change that causes them to open the door for truth and to start looking for God. And for my personal experience, that was because I was having a child. Y'all can thank Tish for my nose. So in my personal experience, it was expecting a new child. I have a daughter. I'm glad that she's with me today. Several years ago, she wrote a letter to me as probably early 20s, and she said, "Thank you for taking care of yourself." And what she meant was the physical and mental. She was seeing me take care of my physical and mental health, but it was a wake-up call to me. Okay, there's a spiritual side to us, and this has prompted me to ask myself, am I taking care of myself spiritually? Because our children are watching us. They're paying attention to what we're doing when they are very little, when they see, I don't know, let's say you pop your husband on the arm playfully, and he starts doing it. The baby starts doing it. Very young. But they're paying attention to us even into adulthood on how to live. So we want to take care of ourselves physically and mentally, but we have to take care of ourselves spiritually if we're going to get to heaven. With Tish, I mentioned that it was 32 years ago that we were baptized, and I remember how happy I was whenever, that shift of having a baby. The baby's now 3 months old, and it's 32 years, and we're baptized about 10:30 at night. And I'm so happy for taking care of my spiritual side, and I come up out of the water. I mean, I hardly had my clothes on. And Tish said, she's hugging me so happy. She said, "I'm so excited for Kelsey, our oldest daughter." And I'm like, she had older children than me, so she understood. I'm thinking, I'm so happy for me. I literally feel a light weight of the entire sins of the world sins that I've had on me lifted. I feel so light. But she was absolutely right. But because again, those children have had a different life. We've had a different life. We live at a Bible camp, and we're surrounded by beautiful Christians all through each year. But whenever somebody's going through a major change, we need to be aware that might be a good time for them, and be open to having conversations with them. And I'm so glad that I now understand, because now I can help my children in a unique way. And train your child in the way he or she should go. Proverbs 22:6 tells us when we train our children in the way they are to go, when they are older, they will not depart from it. And there's a lot of wisdom in this verse. When we remember each of our children, they have their own will. We want to remember, we should and want to remember that it is our responsibility to equip our children for righteous living and how to live to please God. But if for some reason, if either of them chooses a different way, and it can happen. If they have breath in their body, we want to be encouraged that they may eventually return to their first love, Revelation 2:4. So a few examples of actual motherhood, examples of ways that we found helpful, and I know others have trained their children in the way that they were to go, is through regular Bible studies. For us, I'm excited about the scriptures. I've just learned, hey, I don't have to just listen to whoever's up there. I'm supposed to be looking and learning, and I'm excited for the discoveries I'm making. So I want my children to focus on God throughout their day. So what better way than, and this is true for us too, start our days with Bible study. Starting in the morning, and even through their teenage years, I would read the Bible passages and stories to them. I would help them memorize scriptures and Bible facts early in the day whenever possible. I tried to make that a key priority. We also wanted God and spiritual truths to be the last thing they thought of whenever they're going to bed at night. So we would have Bible studies in the evenings, and if for some reason we're out and we're not able to, I would let them listen to Bible scriptures and sermons. Our children still talk about some of the sermons they remember when they were very young, and they can hear the voices of the preachers saying them. So we would let them, as they're drifting to sleep, I want them to start the day and with them to end the day thinking of God, and throughout the day. That's going to be much more helpful. And for ourselves, it's important to consider, I think, having a Bible corner or chair. I had a place where I would sit and I would study my Bible. And so they're seeing that example. I'm not doing it for the sake of example, but as I let them see us study, don't be so busy that we can't let them see that happen. Because we can have when we're moms, motherhood, we can be very busy. That's important, though, for them to know that we're not just making you study the Bible. We don't want them to have that attitude. It's that we want them to see the joy that we have of the corner, the chair, whatever. I had a spot on my sofa, and that I would be doing that whenever they would get up in the morning. So spiritual events. We also try to, and I know many of you do, all these things that I would be very happy if you come up to me at the end and tell me things that you do. Because I have opportunity to talk to my own daughter who's a mom. It might be a great idea I can pass along. But spiritual events, that includes worship, Bible studies, Bible bowls have been very helpful through the years to help them get to not only know their scriptures, but to get to know the other Christians in the area. Summer Bible camps can be very good for helping spend concentrated time with Christians and learning your Bible. Gospel meetings, Bible lectures, even sometimes a vacation Bible school. Another thing that we can do in our homes as mothers is we can demonstrate how we care for others. We can let our children see how we have conversations with others rather than making them leave. We can let them, whether it's a stranger or a person we know, we can let them see us have conversations, listening for needs, and we can, as we become aware of needs and are helping meet the needs of others, we can help our children even help us and meet those needs, whether it's providing a meal or we see someone who needs money for gas. We know somebody who just barely got to the church building and they need money for gas. They can help us too and participate in that process and have a love. It teaches them a love for other people. But listening is important, and we want them to see how to do that, because if we're not listening, if we're with somebody, we're probably talking. There's nothing wrong with talking, but we have to listen or we won't know that person's needs. We also want to teach our children how to respond to sin. There are a couple of things that came to mind for this. Not look at sin. So if we would be driving down the highway and there's some immoral or immodest or sinful sign, or if there's a commercial on TV or even a scene on a show is extremely passionate, look away quickly. We looked away. And even our children now have said that was helpful for them. Another thing is we don't play sin. That means that we're not going to imitate or laugh at or find entertainment in sins, Galatians 5:19 through 21, like lasciviousness, parties, drunkenness, and other works of the flesh. Remember, Eve first looked at the tree she couldn't have, so we want to look away from it. We want to teach our children to look away from it because the next step may be partaking in that sin. It doesn't mean that they aren't aware of sin, but we're teaching them what is godly and what is not. And so we're teaching them how to respond and stay on the straight and the narrow. They also need to know the importance of their influences on them and their influences on others. So we want to teach them to understand who they allow to influence them is going to be huge for how they live their lives. Who they allow in their inner circle is going to have the greatest influence on them, who they are and the life that they live. Having not only Christians, but strong Christians as their closest friends is going to be most beneficial to them as they draw nigh to God while resisting the devil. And this can especially be important during the dating years. So I don't know the age of children that you may have or grandchildren that you may have in your lives, but if you haven't had the topic of how you'll handle dating, that's going to probably be an important recommendation that I make, because who they date has a lot of influence on who they are and who they will possibly marry one day. So if you and your husband have not decided, because it is not just a mama decision, I would recommend that you have that conversation with them. And I would say probably do it very soon, because we had it before they were probably in elementary school, and I'm thankful that we had that discussion. So our children also need to be aware that their influence on others is going to be important. They can be the person who can attract others in their lives to God by the way that they live, or they can potentially turn someone away. Have you ever met someone who said, no, I know, I've heard, I met so-and-so was a member of the Church of Christ. I want nothing to do with it. So our children and ourselves, we can have influence on others, and we can help close the door or open the door for someone to be receptive to truth when they are exposed, whenever they have the opportunity or start looking. So when our children are older, our roles as mothers are different. They change a little bit, and we can't change past mistakes. I don't know if y'all know it, but we do make mistakes when we're moms. But there are some things that we can do. We can remember that each stage of life that our children are going through is a stage they've never been at before, but it's a stage that you have been at. And so it's important for us to their experiences are going to be unique to them. It's going to be different. It doesn't mean that they're going through the same thing you did, but they've lived at the same stage of life, and you have been there. So they may want or need your availability on how they can handle it, how on your insight that you might have. Also, whenever possible, continue to be there for them in a way that's comfortable for both of you. Meaning we don't want to be heavy we want to be available. We don't want to also just smile and not really be there for them to be able to talk to. Be available and consider asking them how you can help them. Give them input in that relationship. But how can you help them so that they do not feel neglected and overburdened? And one day, should they marry, they're going to become one with their spouse. Adam and Eve did. And if you're married, you are one with your spouse. Respect the relationship that the child has with their spouse, and be careful not to overstep. I think that's really important for us to remember. Find ways to encourage them to be the best spouse in their role as husband or wife that they can be. And when they become parents themselves, try to remember the challenges that you had and offer encouragement and guidance when it's appropriate. Pray for them, point them to God, and this is a busy season for them, likely, whenever they have children. We want to be setting the examples we should in action, example, and in availability. So we've covered a lot in talking about Eve, what we can learn from her as mother, what we can learn about motherhood, some ideas for ways that we can implement godly behaviors in our own roles as motherhood. But as Christian mothers, we have a mission, and it starts in the home. Usually, you might adopt somebody that's an adult. I do know people who have done that. But it starts in the home. And just as God desired Eve's obedience, He desires obedience from each of us today. We're to guide our children to know God and understand His will for them. Our examples of godly living should also enforce what He wants them to know. Our roles and responsibilities change as the children age and enter different stages of life, but even as they mature, we still have a role to play in continuing to give them spiritual guidance. One of the lessons we learned from Eve is that each child has a free will. We have already talked about this. They have a will of their own, and they're going to ultimately decide if they serve God. But just as Eve was not able to control Cain or any of her other children, Cain killed his brother. We can't control our children's spiritual decisions. We will not live life perfectly, something I've learned firsthand, and if you haven't, you will probably learn this. We make mistakes or later learn that we could have chosen better. The success will come when we earnestly seek God's guidance and set the best examples possible for our children and how to live. It's important that we give ourselves grace in the journey of motherhood. No matter what the past looks like, we only have today. So let us each ask ourselves, what can I do today that will please God and eternally benefit my family and children the most? So thank you all for being here today.